Hey, APUSH Nation, welcome in. And as you can see today, we're in the pristine backdrop of the Smith household for the first time all year, since the weather is really absolutely stunning. Today, our topic is going to be the presidency of William Howard Taft and also the election of 1912, one of the most bizarre elections in American history. We'll start with Taft because Taft was sort of an interesting figure in the Republican Party, as he was chosen to be Roosevelt's kind of hand-picked successor after Theodore Roosevelt's 2 terms as president. Taft, as we read in the Pacific Negroes chapter of the Imperial Cruise book, was a governor in the Philippines, and Taft had already been sort of tabbed as a potential presidential candidate in the Republican Party due to the job that he did overseas. Taft would narrowly defeat our old friend William Jennings Bryan, who lost now his 3rd presidential election. Taft only narrowly beat Bryan in the popular vote. However, in the electoral vote, again, the Northern Republican dominance proved to be pivotal for Taft's victory. Taft was somewhat of a reluctant president, and what I mean by that is Taft did not view himself as a presidential politician. He was sort of pushed into the role, primarily by his wife, who kind of pursued political power all throughout Taft's career for her husband. And like I mentioned, he was sort of, Roosevelt's hand-picked guy. So Taft was, in this respect, kind of reluctant to take on the role presidency. Now, I'm just going to kind of briefly hit Taft's era with a couple key points. And let's first talk about issues abroad. As we have been focusing on a lot lately, America was flexing its muscles overseas, primarily in Latin America. And then we mentioned how China was another region, and Asia was another region where the United States was heavily involved. During Taft's tenure in Asia, the Philippines remained a base of operation for the United States. However, China was undergoing a political revolution, not the Boxer Rebellion, that had already failed, but a revolution led by Sun Yat-sen took place in 1911 and 1912, and that threatened American business abroad. However, Taft did not send troops as his predecessor before Roosevelt, William McKinley, had done with the Boxer Rebellion, but that was going on and was a primary concern for Americans. Taft's real issue, though, was still in Latin America. And while Roosevelt certainly had his foreign policy with the Roosevelt corollary and then the big stick theory, Taft instituted sort of a new precedence for American politicians in handling foreign affairs, and that was what was known as dollar diplomacy. You can kind of probably figure out for yourself the idea of dollar diplomacy, but more or less, Taft was pumping millions of dollars into Latin American countries such as Mexico, which your reading is going to focus very heavily on how the United States was so directly involved with Mexico, but also places like Nicaragua and Chile and Venezuela, and then obviously, of course, the newly founded Panama. Not only was Taft encouraging the government to pump money into Latin America, through dollar diplomacy, Taft also steadfastly suggested to American business owners to put their money into Latin America. So countries like Nicaragua and Cuba, Panama, were being heavily financed, and American businesses were increasingly becoming more of a presence in that southern hemisphere as a part of Latin America. But the plan sort of backfired for Taft. Dollar diplomacy ultimately proved to be quite volatile because ask yourself the following question: what if the countries reject the money? What if the countries wish to remove American business presence in their nations? And that's exactly what happened. And Nicaragua is a great example. A revolution in Nicaragua took place in the early 1900s, and consequently, they moved to put a lot of American businesses out of their nation, and that threatened American interests in Latin America. So while dollar diplomacy may have been a new strategy that Taft was employing in America's foreign policy, and certainly it's not going to go away. If you think about how the United States tries to utilize its vice and grip on foreign countries still to this day, dollar diplomacy is a characteristic of how our government operates abroad. But like I said, it was a very, very difficult process in some parts of Latin America for Taft, chiefly Nicaragua. As far as other foreign issues that Taft was tackling, he missed World War I. That had yet to break out. But please pay attention in the reading later that you receive later today or yesterday, whenever I sent it, because I want you guys to know how we were so heavily involved in Mexico, and that was a big part of Taft's presidency. Domestically, Taft continued the trend as a progressive president. We used that term earlier in the week to describe how the Republican Party was leading the charge, especially Theodore Roosevelt, who's considered to be one of the first progressives. Taft sort of picked up where Roosevelt left off, especially in terms of trust busting. 80 pieces of legislation were introduced during Taft's presidency to limit the power of trusts and monopoly. But no example is more significant than what occurred in 1911, again towards the end of Taft's presidency, and that's the breakup of Standard Oil by the United States Supreme Court. Now again, the president himself didn't actually influence the breakup, but Standard Oil, which was owned by John D. Rockefeller, one of our captains of industry robber barons, Standard Oil at one point held up to almost 91% of the United States' oil refinery business. That is an astonishingly high rate. And eventually Standard Oil was challenged in the Supreme Court under, of course, the Sherman Antitrust Act. So for the first time, the Sherman Antitrust Act was able to prosecute, and the United States government went after Standard Oil in a case that was just basically Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus the United States. And in the end, the government ruled Standard Oil will be broken up into 34 different companies, some of which you know today. For example, Exxon and Mobil, which at one point were separate companies, were formed as a result of Standard Oil's breakup. But real quick, just how did Standard Oil get there? Well, for you students who have had introduction to economics in your time at Basis, you may have heard about vertical and horizontal integration policies, and Standard Oil really wrote the textbook on how these two differing theories of building a monopoly and building up a company work. With vertical integration, Standard Oil actually initially used this practice, and that is essentially when you buy up the means of production to basically dominate whatever marketplace that you have. So in this case, it's obviously oil, and so any element that goes into the production of oil refinery, you look to buy up those means of production. Whereas with horizontal integration, you're basically scraping across laterally all the different companies that potentially use or make your product. So in Standard Oil's case, they were buying out other competitors. And this was sort of the method in which many of the monopolies that we've kind of referenced before, and the robber barons, they use these policies of horizontal integration and vertical integration to build massive economies of scale. That's a good term to mark down in your notebooks, just to associate with Rockefeller, Standard Oil, but also just the monopolies in general. The analogy that I always make to kind of help you remember vertical versus horizontal integrations, think of like a shoe. So on a shoe, you've got the laces, you've got the rubber soles, you've got the material that makes the shoe. So if you're practicing vertical integration, you're buying up every single company you can that makes those the different products that go into a shoe. So you own a laces company, you own an eyelet company, you own a rubber company, whatever the case may be. That's practicing vertical integration in an economies of scale type model. Whereas horizontal integration would be that you would buy up competitors in the shoe industry so that they did not beat you out competitively for prices. So Standard Oil used that to build this massive monopoly, but eventually during Taft's presidency it was it was broken up by the Sherman Antitrust Act in the United States Supreme Court. One last point about Taft, if you don't mind. There's a legend that goes with Taft, and you may have even heard this, that Taft got stuck in a bathtub. That's actually not 100% accurate. But the legend of Taft and the bathtub has persisted because Taft was an incredibly rotund individual. He was over 300 pounds most of his life. And where historians believe the bathtub urban legend stemmed from is that Taft, while traveling on a ship out of the country, a custom tub that could fit up to 4 men was actually built and put on the ship. And that's where the theory that Taft once got stuck in a tub, or that he had to use butter to get out, that's the other one that kind of goes with it. That's not true, but Taft was prone to get stuck in chairs. That happened quite a bit. As I mentioned, he had health issues relating to the fact that he was severely obese. And when he got out of office, he lost about almost 80 pounds. And Taft out of office may be more impressive than Taft in office, because he became the Supreme Court Chief Justice, the only president in American history to go from the White House to the ultimate bench in the Supreme Court. And he was eventually appointed in the 1920s and served for a little less than a decade. So kind of a remarkable career when you stop and think about it for William Taft. But anyways, where are we going here to wrap up the chat? Let's go to the 1912 election. 1912 election is one of the wackiest ones in U.S. history. It involved a significant challenge from a third-party candidate. And in most of these cases, when we talk about third-party candidates, whether it be the Know-Nothing Party that resulted out of the boost of nativism in the 1840s and 50s, the Free Soil Movement, the Populist Party with James Weaver in 1892, most of these third-party candidates don't tend to fare all that well, but this is a case where a third-party candidate had remarkable success, and the reason being is he was no slouch at all, and that was because Theodore Roosevelt became the third-party candidate in the election of 1912. Now, what was Roosevelt doing back in the election? Well, Taft and Roosevelt had a falling out, and as a result of the fact that Taft was perceived to be a little bit too conservative Republican, whereas Roosevelt was pushing, obviously, for the Republican Party to go in a more progressive measure. Now, even though Taft was moderately progressive in his presidency, especially with the trust busting, Roosevelt still felt as if Taft was not progressive enough. And so Roosevelt went off to form what was known as the Progressive Party, and he ran in 1912. But the Progressive Party that Roosevelt formed actually took on a different nickname, and it was called the Bull Moose Party. And the reason being that Roosevelt, when asked about forming his own political party in 1912 to a reporter, responded that he feels like a bull moose, and that just sort of stuck with the Bull Moose Party. So Roosevelt forms his own political party, the Progressive or Bull Moose Party, and he's going to try to undercut Taft on some of the issues of progressivism and bring those into the election. And speaking of the election, we already talked about how Roosevelt's personality was so vigorous in the way that he campaigned previously in 1904, but also in the 1912 election. Just a bizarre story involving Roosevelt. So in October of 1912, he's actually in the city of Milwaukee, and he was there to do a speech to members of his rally. And about a minute into the speech, which Roosevelt began, I'm going to read off the lines here. So here's how he starts the speech. Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. There's Roosevelt's opening remarks. But his second line to the speech is actually quite different. So he starts out, friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. Pause. A little bit of noise in the crowd. And then Roosevelt starts the second line. I don't know whether you fully understood that I have just been shot. So yes, Theodore Roosevelt, while giving a speech in front of an audience in Milwaukee, was shot on stage while giving a speech. And the shooter, who was an unemployed saloon keeper, shot Roosevelt. But here's where the part gets crazy. Roosevelt would carry on his speech for about 50 more pages. He would read the speech, and it took about 90 more minutes, and he actually finished this speech in front of the audience. And when Roosevelt was done, this is kind of like part of, again, the persona of Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt opened up his jacket to show his blood-soaked shirt. And he actually said it takes more than that, referring to the bullet, to kill a bull moose. So there's that nickname he gave himself again. And really what saved Roosevelt was the fact that inside his coat pocket, he had about 50 pages of his speech written. And those 50 pages actually slowed the bullet down, so that was not able to, he was not able to actually penetrate too deep into his skin. And one more line from Roosevelt here. Fortunately, I had my manuscripts, so you see I was going to make a long speech, and there was a bullet. There was a bullet that went through, and it probably saved me from going into my heart. The bullet is in me now, so I cannot make a very long speech, but I will try my best. And then he further went on to say, I give you my word, I do not care a rap about being shot, not a rap. So this is kind of Teddy Roosevelt in a nutshell, folks. He would finally, when he was done, he was taken to the hospital, and he did not die. He did not die from being shot at all during his speech, and this kind of built up Roosevelt's campaign quite a bit. And the campaign would get pretty crazy as far as Roosevelt and Taft. And obviously, we're kind of missing the point here. Who's the Democrat candidate? Well, in this case, it was former president of Princeton University, Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was a Northern Democrat who ran and continued sort of the Democrat theme of the day, drew in many of the Southern votes. Many of the populist movement was drawn to the Democrat Party. Woodrow Wilson would take advantage of the rift between Taft and Roosevelt to winning the presidential election quite easily. In fact, I'm just going to pull up the votes here. Wilson, however, fared very poorly in the popular vote. He garnered only 41% of the popular vote, while Taft received 23% of the popular vote. Roosevelt had 27%. Oh, by the way, Eugene Debs had 6% of the popular vote. He ran as the socialist candidate for the second time. However, Wilson absolutely crushed at the Electoral College vote. He won 40 states. Meanwhile, Roosevelt carried 6 and Taft carried 2. So just a commanding victory for Woodrow Wilson in the Electoral College, and he would assume the presidency for a Democrat for the first time since our friend Grover Cleveland back in 1892. So a remarkable run for the Republican Party in the progressive era. But Woodrow Wilson's come to the White House in 1912, or 1913, I should say, and that's when we're going to really start focusing in on how the Democrat Party came back, and also we'll be gearing up next week for a discussion on World War I. That all is going to happen during Woodrow Wilson. So I hope you've enjoyed the outdoor edition. It's President's Day tomorrow, so enjoy the day off, and I will see you guys back on Tuesday. And by the way, in case some of you were wondering, you can make your plans now. A little self-promotion here. Thursday, 5:30 p.m. at Canyon State Academy in Queen Creek. It's about 15 minutes from Basis's campus, our campus. Your varsity boys basketball team will be in the state playoffs as the 4 seed. We don't know our opponent yet, but the game will be at 5:30 at Canyon State. I'll have the address up in class posted on Tuesday. I really hope as many of you guys can come out. I will offer that Instagram or email bonus. But aside from that, man, this would be great. It would mean a lot to us to be there and support us on Thursday night. So I hope to see you guys there. Have a great rest of the weekend. Remember, the past shapes the future. Take care.